As Teresa said, our focus here is to think about the future and what are the changes that are going to happen in the transportation industry that will affect how we do our business and the skills that will be required in that future. And for those of you who are approaching my degree of grayness, you know, think back about what the world was like when you joined a transportation agency or started thinking about transportation in an academic setting, you know, 20 or 30 years ago. The most telling comment that I ever heard was from one of WSDOT's old construction engineers, and this was about 15 years ago, who said to me, you know, the tools that I used when I started, Leonardo could have used. And I can't use the tools that the young people are using today. Well, if you think about that in context, an awful lot has changed in the last 20 or 30 years. And if you think about the next 10 or 20, I wanted to do 30, but Clark wouldn't let us. 30 years in the future, a lot of things are going to change as well. And to help us think about that, Teresa has put together some thoughts.
Thank you, Ernie. I'm also going to have to scoot through this thing pretty quick, so I have tons of notes here. I'm going to try to not use them and just to get us going here. So let's start out by thinking about some of the major changes in the public sector transportation. It's sort of the NEPA Act and the federal 3C program sort of changed us, our thinking about planning for construction projects, and then the end of and environmental concerns at the end of the interstate era that have moved us away from the construction to operations and maintenance, asset management, decision making, sort of, and led to the tremendous need then for students that understand natural resources, facilitating public input, traffic management, rehabilitation, and maintenance. And I want to start with a thought here that the very traditional agencies have changed over the years, incremental and slow change, and now we're into a period when we're really going to have to speed up that rapid change to a rapid change and be much more evolutionary in our organizations. And there are a few ways to think about that we've organized this presentation and looking at some of the major business functions within the organizations, looking at some of the driving cultural changes, the scope of concern for agencies, and then some of the emerging influences. So we'll start with engineering. I'm not going to go through every change that's gone on in engineering, just highlighting a few. Certainly in materials area, we've changed over the years, tremendous changes in some of the materials that we're using, and then some of the analysis that goes with those materials, and in our endeavors to make more robust infrastructure. And construction has seen a huge change, and we've realized that because of the need for user convenience and serviceability of our roadways through rapid construction, tremendous use of spatial information, alternative contracting, professional construction management, off-peak construction. All of these have had tremendous changes in our engineering over the years within the organization. And perhaps some of the biggest changes in recent years has been what is driven by the cut down or the slowdown in construction and the increase in user demand for the transportation system, and that huge increase in users, and which has led to the congestion, and that has been quite a change then. And the true birth of a whole area, which is the traffic management, that's come about after we've designed the roadways. Now we need to manage them. And this particular slide just showing the help truck that's along the Illinois Tollway. You could also put up there those pictures that show sort of the traffic management control centers and all of the high-tech equipment there that's looking at the operations within various highways. So there's this whole area of the traffic engineering, incident management, traffic information systems, and intelligent vehicles and highways and information sharing, and all of this has kind of moved us away from roadway geometric design into whole areas that involve electrical engineering, computer sciences, and communication systems networking, human factors, and in order to put together a lot of creative ideas in traffic control. And this has certainly changed the flavor of a lot of our engineering education courses. As we move then from the construction to the operations and maintenance, then we've opened up a whole new area of the, and whole new dimensions of program and investment management to ideas of asset management, pavement and bridge management systems, all these decision support. We're looking now at the importance of the user costs and how that comes into the equations, and getting much more sophisticated with our benefit cost analysis and life cycle cost analysis. And getting all of this done then requires some new approaches and new analytical tools, and of course tremendous dependence and reliance on information systems and database management systems. So not to overlook then the whole area of maintenance technologies that have come about. So this is really a difference, not just construction, but then maintaining. And this particular photo shows the culverts, a culvert replacement then on the Illinois Turnpike, and how we need to do these things in rapid replacement, or a whole new area of rehabilitation technologies and strategies. And this, quite frankly, universities don't do a very good job in training students for this. We're still pretty much focused on the new construction, new design, overlooking some of the importance of these. Again, the life cycle analysis coming in to help us make those decisions about the investments there, the concepts of perpetual facilities and the trade-offs there, and then a whole area, important area in our part of the country, which is the winter maintenance and operations. So in the area of planning design, spatial information and spatial information analysis tools have been, quite frankly, revolutionized the way planners analyze and display information, leading us then to better ways to do performance-based planning, better ways to justify our decisions and illustrate those decisions, collect information from the users, and look at various scenarios. Within the design of facilities, there's certainly a lot of considerations for automation, life cycle design, context-sensitive design, and then a whole slew of what I'm putting up there, the X abilities, maintainability, constructability, operability, repairability, and sort of that greater importance overall in the cost of the life cycle of the facility. In the area of transportation financing, this has just come out, just sort of this whole new innovative financing tools that have really led to the dependency or the need for students that are educated in much more sophisticated financial management and contracting, economics, and even legal knowledge and experience in looking at alternative financing mechanisms, whether they're tolls or public-private partnerships, debt financing, various financial management, and sort of risk and game theory. All of these things have sort of come into now the realm of transportation financing, and quite frankly, our students don't understand some of these issues when in civil engineering, and understanding then how the relationship between what they're building and how it gets paid for, and how some of the engineering design is then dependent on our ability to pay for them. This is a slide I put together after a conversation with Ruben Anthony. I don't know if you remember this conversation, Ruben, when we sort of talked about generally the impact of technology on transportation organizations. And Ruben talked to me and said, you know, fundamentally it's changed the workforce and the business processes, and how over time the agencies have transitioned from very labor-intensive, procedure-oriented organizations to more technology-smart organizations, and that the investment then in technology within the organization for a large part is due to staff positions, where bringing in the new young people who understand some of these tools, and Ernie mentioned this at the beginning, that bring in and then motivate the need for, or the desire for these tools, and sort of the staff is pulling the organization forward. And so that does then lead us to understand that then the university has a big role in pulling that forward. And so if we're not sort of out there giving our students those tools, then they're not going to be using them within the workplace. Another aspect here that's kind of changed the overall culture of the organizations is then the use of outsourcing. And this particular graphic comes from the Managing by Network, a book that it tells us a little bit about the greater management through goal setting and incentives, measurement, and the change management. The outcomes are obtained through the outsourcing. And so this really is the idea that we're focusing then on the outcome of these efforts and not just on the process. And so the contracting services tends to change the role of the manager from a manager of people and manager of process to more of a manager of outcomes. And particularly in our engineering students, where we're learning then it's all about the process and the analytical procedures and getting the right answer, then we need to be looking then more at the performance-based and outcome-based approaches and the need for those. The next slide here, another overarching impact within our organizations now is this, the accountability and the desire for the ability to define the outcomes related to the resources and policies, and to have procedures that are open and to understand and understandable are critical then for gaining the support and understanding of the public and elected officials. And many agencies are now spending a lot of effort on trying to improve their accountability and making that transparent. And so this has really led us to defining performance measures and a lot of the, and then being able to collect the data to measure those measures and then communicating those measures. And this particular slide is showing the desire to be able to illustrate the change in a level of service given various changes in the budget. And it's not always linear, of course, but the idea here is to be able to show then that if you want higher levels of service, you need to be able to pay for that. And so showing the accountability of giving the budget and what you can obtain from that. So let's move on and sort of talk about some of the overall new, well, it's not new, but some of the newly important and newly recognized trends within the transportation agencies. And that's really the renewed understanding and relationship between transportation and the economy. And that infrastructure investment really raises the private rates of return. And that the availability, for example, of fruits, fresh fruits and vegetables that we enjoyed this morning for breakfast, and our ability to go to Walmart and get our Christmas toys, and that the ability of Walmart then to perfect its just-in-time optimization are really possible because of the prior investment in the roads and bridges that we have right now. And so that even in 1903, Ford Motor Company observed that relationship between transportation and inventory, and that he needed to carry more stock because of bad transportation as manufacturing process. And so the investment in infrastructure overall, not just in transportation, but any investment in infrastructure changes the face of the nation. And besides transportation, there's other examples of rural electrification or the internet. The economists in the room could probably explain this much better than I, but that the network externalities of infrastructure investment, that the benefits to the businesses is positive, and that increases as a function of the number of users, other users of that infrastructure. And so certainly the point here is that the investment in infrastructure has a tremendous benefit to the economy. And that's becoming more and more of a point of awareness within the organizations and in decision making and driving many of our decisions. The other one I would point out here is, and if we talk about sort of global impacts and global competition, and this slide is kind of curious because here we've heard a lot about sort of the information economy within the U.S. and the growth of China in manufacturing and so on. This particular slide shows us as late as 2006, the U.S. produced nearly a quarter of the world's manufactured goods. We're still quite a robust manufacturing country, and much of that is then depends on our freight system. So of course, you have to understand that we also consume about that much of the world's manufactured goods. So in a global economy, the players are changing. This slide shows the projected change in the GDP. Note the rise in China and India and Brazil. Since China and India have much larger populations, the productivity is needed to compete with those within those countries. And certainly a part of the U.S. Productivity is attributed to our transportation system. You have to understand also that we have a much smaller country, and so our per capita productivity is quite a bit higher. To maintain our competitive, our global competitiveness, we really need that highly educated, motivated workforce, and we have probably one of the highest educated, if not the highest educated, motivated workforces in the world, and we have the luxury of some of the best manufacturing and capital equipment as well. And so that's kept us up there, despite our large land mass and high economic standard of living. This one talks about some of the transportation and logistics related to the GDP. And so you can see over the past 16 years, transportation and logistics become more efficient in the U.S. as a measure of the percent of GDP. This one is showing then the comparison of the administrative costs, transportation costs, and the inventory costs. And so we've been able to drive down inventory costs, and because of our ability to get more sophisticated at our logistics over time, while we kept the administrative costs and the transportation costs have stayed about the same. We've been much more efficient in our logistics, and so you all hear about how that the highways have become somewhat of the warehouses. So our industry has become very clever about how to take advantage and build upon that infrastructure and make money on that. The cost of fuel and congestion have some effect on that inventory costs. And you can see that sort of jumping up there a bit at the end, that we've squeezed most of the efficiency out of that, and so now there's a little bit more of a need to increase on the inventory cost, which is the black area or the dark area there. We're seeing then some things of industrial parks and freight villages and so on, which is the industry's way of sort of trying to address some of that and to continue to squeeze the efficiency out of there. So let's start talking a little bit more about some of the kind of global patterns. Or what I want to point out here is that the sphere of concern for a lot of our state agencies become much larger in the global economy. And for example, agencies need to be aware of emerging trends, such as the one shown here in the evolving trade patterns. This sort of exemplifies the dynamic nature of the U.S. freight system and how just a change in opening up of the Asia-Suez route will quite likely have a tremendous impact on the freight and the use of the roadways as well as the rails. And so if you look at things like charts like this one, which we've all seen on the predicting the truck volumes mapped to the highway system, and it could be very wrong if we don't include some of the global trade patterns that are shown on the first on the previous slide. And so my point here is that our transportation professionals within the organizations can't sort of just stay within the borders of their own state. And so suddenly the influencing factors reach far beyond the jurisdictional boundaries when we look at things on a global scale. And so the transportation system that was developed has been very sort of traditional and conservative method of development, and suddenly it's not just local and low risk factors, but there are very large global factors as well. And so transportation professionals need to be aware of those global factors, and we need to be able to seed that within the education of our students and making them aware of how what they're doing has this much larger influence. So the same situation for predicted rail growth, and suddenly we could see a tremendous increase in the demand for rail in the New England ports, much higher than what's certainly what's shown there if that Asian Suez Canal. So we have what we could end up seeing is the heavy black lines there, rather than just in the port of Long Beach, Long Island. So let's move on to another emerging influence that's really much more closer to home here, which is that the ethanol production capacity. And I don't know if you can see that along the x-axis there, and they're listing a number of states and then the production, the operation capacity, and the production capacity under construction or expansion there. And I will, without reading them all, I will just tell you that within the first 11 of those are 8 of the 10 states in the Ashto, Mississippi Valley region, or the Ashto, yes, Mississippi Valley Conference. And so the point here is that there's an introduction of a new enterprise or industry such as the ethanol could have a significant impact in the way that transportation systems are used. And so that really means then that suddenly our state transportation agencies and the employees there have to understand and be able to speak the language of supply chain distribution systems, and so that they're really prepared to be able to work with the industry such as the ethanol distribution. And so if they really understand some of those issues and they understand how the industry will use the transportation system, they're ahead of the game. And instead of waiting then until things become such a pinch points, and it's that they're really prepared and they're working with it at the beginning, and that gets back to then that relationship between transportation and economy. And so I would even then take that a step higher then, and really then looking at the concept of the mega regions. And so this growth of these economically interdependent mega regions. Here again, the multi-jurisdictional awareness and cooperation are critical for the success of the mega region. And you can see then there that, let's see, I'll use the pointer, here's us, and we have a mega region there. Jurisdictions across the mega regions generally share some common culture, common economic base. Ours would be the manufacturing and agriculture, some of the common workforce and workforce ethics, some of the common expertise, the infrastructure, natural resources, and for example, the auto industry and John Deere manufacturing have presence in nearly all of the states within our region. Those industry, that and other industry sectors are interdependent for the overall industry success. And so we can't be just competing against, our neighboring state for this. We have to be working with them. And so too are the political jurisdictions need to work together for the interdependent success. And so it's not just a competition across the border. It's really competition as a mega region within the world. And so the success of each jurisdiction within the mega regions really interdependent on the success of the other jurisdictions. And so we need to take this to a larger scale, and we need to prepare transportation professionals for that. So let's talk about just for completeness here, the concepts of the smart growth and development. I'm not going to go into this and give you a lesson in this. I'm sure most of you understand some of these concepts that are emerging and driving the way then that we provide work and living. What I want to point out here is that sort of looking through some of the articles then on the cost of sprawl, for example, that you could see statistics, and I'm going to sort of read them here, is that if we were able to increase both the density of our non-residential use and the floor area ratio, that just increase that density by 20%, and the floor area ratio by 10%, we could save almost 190,000 lane miles and $110 billion in between now and 2025. And this was data that was generated in 2000. So of course that the cost of construction's gone up tremendously. And so the smart growth concepts are really things that we need to embrace and to make our students aware of as a way of living and a value system. So let's move on. How am I doing for time? Okay, I'm kind of pushing it. Okay, good. All right, so let's move on and think about another major issue that's influencing, and that would be the environmental. And I'll start then with sort of the non-attainment area, but so the regulations for cleaner fuels and energies have contributed greatly to our ability to improve and to address this problem. And last week I heard Dan Murray, who's the VP of research for ATRI, give a statistic saying that the diesel fuels and the engines, the improvements that we've made in the recent past are such that the exhaust from a diesel truck is cleaner than the ambient air in Los Angeles from the state-of-the-art diesel truck. So my point here is that we've done a lot to address the air quality issue. Now the challenge really is the greenhouse gases that are causing the global climate change, and so far there really is not much technology solution. I don't know if you can read this very well. This is just a chart showing the climate change plan for Canada, and it's really almost not a plan. Even if rapid and sustained emissions reductions are achieved, the impact of climate change will continue to be felt for many decades, and adaptive activities will be required. And so this is just showing that even if we address this, the long jump there at the end here is the difference in temperature from well, it's related then, scaled to the difference in temperature between 1961 and 1990. And so showing then the global climate temperature changes will jump even if we can address the situation in the near future. And so really here, what we need to, the take back here is really that the global climate change is that 800-pound environmental challenge that's with us. And other transportation environmental challenges that we faced are sort of the invasive species issue, and the air quality, and the groundwater contamination from non-point source pollution, and those all really pale in comparison to this one. That I don't need to sort of go into this, tell this audience too much about the contribution of transportation to the greenhouse gas production. It's certainly there. It's certainly something that we all are working very hard to find solutions and ways to deal with this. Short of a cap-and-trade system, there really are few incentives at this point to the reduced consumption of fossil fuels, short of another tremendous increase in our fuel costs. So some of the things that are going on really are addressing it through systems operational efficiencies, where things like open roll tolling is a really good example of that, as well as other efforts to just simply reduce the consumption of the fossil fuels. The U.S., then, I heard another statistic recently that the U.S. has the lowest gross vehicle weight limits in the among developed countries. Another one is this lean logistics, which involves reduction of shipment size and frequent deliveries, being proposed that we move into then a green logistics, which would consolidate shipments and reduce the transportation, but would then increase the inventory holding. And so others are, of course, the alternative modes and alternative fuels, and we'll talk about a little bit of some of that. So here's just a chart showing that reduced energy consumption, a comparison then of barge to train to truck, of the average distance that 1 gallon of diesel fuel moves 1 ton of truck, or 1 ton of freight. And so you can see then that truck is much less efficient than the train, than the barge. And so we do consider, and if we move into something like a greener logistics, then we would consider these alternative modes in the context of the global climate change. The CO2 emissions really are driven by the economy. And so during a recession, we may get a reprieve in that we'll have fewer vehicles on the road and on the rails. So when we look at this, it seems like such a no-brainer. We ought to be moving everything by barge. Well, trucks offset the fuel efficiency of the rail and the barge with the higher speed and the reliability. And this is really important for time-sensitive commodities such as the fruit or the vegetables and FedEx packages. You know, there are very few FedEx packages move by train, and it would be safe to assume that FedEx fleet doesn't include any barges. That was my joke, okay? No, just that, and that would be even higher. Yeah. Good question. No, that's just the chart I found from the major freight carriers. Yeah, good question. So let's, oh, this one's got the transition stuff. Okay, I thought we got rid of that. All right, so this is just a chart very quickly to sort of show that there's very real public benefits of things like the freight rail, or looking at other alternative modes when we compare some of looking at the green logistics and the supply chain, and sort of some of those hidden costs, though, of that green logistics. And the ideas of looking at alternative modes really are that you know, that it's going to require then some tremendous reorganization of a supply chain, and the change of some of the equipment and the facilities and the employees, and those costs will be quite significant. And so it's not just as easy as sort of just changing, you know, what mode we go by. So let me wrap up. I just had a couple more concepts. I want to throw out this one is a little bit further out there, which is some of the concepts of the green construction that we're just now starting to think about and put together. And these are just some points. Actually, most of them came from Ernie and I, which is kind of driving back from Minneapolis last week and kind of jotting down some of those. And so we sort of looked at that as in terms of reducing the total carbon footprint and having zero landfill, and thinking about, well, yeah, recyclable and using recyclables is really a good idea, but if we're still using all those fresh raw materials to build our roads, are we really doing green materials? And looking, or green construction, and looking at things like the material sourcing, and are we using materials that come from, where do they come from, and how far do they have to travel? And then looking at considering and taking advantage of all the best practices for protecting the resources that are involved in the construction. And so actually making the much more context-sensitive engineering, in that we're going to use engineering methods that are compatible with the resources and the area that we're building in. Also kind of looking at then our construction equipment. While the on-road engines have, there's tremendous improvement in the emissions of on-road engines, the off-road engines have lagged far behind. And some of that's really just due to lack of regulation for those, as well as then just the very, very long lifespan of these pieces of equipment. And then thinking about things like the perpetual infrastructure. And so we put out there that there's a challenge here to start defining this area and getting our students aware of it. So I will finish this up here with just kind of a punch list of some of the concepts that have changed the context of transportation, and that environmental awareness and the need to understand natural resources and ways that construction is influencing our natural resources, the use of it as well as the protection of it. And that's all the way from the invasive species to actually the raw materials. The public involvement and the need for students to be able to communicate with the public. We see this quite a bit, and this is becoming more and more important. And so it's not just communication skills, but it's really also those techniques on engaging. Focusing on the construction and operations, focus from construction to operations, which is a challenge, and that infrastructure renewal and those technologies, the smart growth concepts, that way of thinking, transportation financing, the intelligent transportation systems, the whole realm of technology that goes with those, whole new areas for civil engineering. And the role, better understanding the role of transportation in the economy and the impact and the importance of transportation, the globalization and the awareness of that, and getting students more tuned into the globalization and not just the local. And then, of course, climate change and new things like green construction.